Why are you giving leftovers to that dirty kid? The man at the next table sneered loudly. The waitress just smiled, placed the plate on the table, and walked away without saying a word. The next day, the entire street came to a standstill when six dust-covered black SUVs pulled up in front of the small diner. Who was this mysterious boy? And why would a general send an entire team to thank an ordinary waitress? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Clara Jennings, 29, worked the night shift at Betty's Diner, a modest establishment nestled near an old military base in rural Georgia. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, giving the worn leather booths and chipped formica countertops a certain timeless quality that kept locals coming back decade after decade. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment above the town's only laundromat, having lost her mother to cancer 5 years earlier. With no other family to speak of, Clara spent most of her tip money caring for an overweight stray cat she'd named Toby, who had somehow transformed from a temporary visitor into her closest companion. Every evening followed the same rhythm. The dinner rushed from 5 to 8, clean up until 9, and then the quieter hours when truckers and night owls would stop for coffee and pie. And every night, without fail, Clara would discreetly package leftover food, usually a sandwich and some fries, in a small styrofoam container, which she'd placed near the wooden bench at the edge of the parking lot. Some noticed, most didn't. It wasn't something she announced or explained, just a quiet ritual performed with the same efficiency as refilling salt shakers or wiping down menus. That Thursday evening in October, however, was different. A customer seated by the window watched as Clara not only left the container, but handed it directly to a thin boy of about 10, dressed in worn clothes several sizes too large, his face smudged with dirt but his eyes clear and solemn. The customer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, who'd stopped in while his BMW was being serviced at the garage down the street, let out a derisive laugh. Loud enough to be heard by nearby tables, he called to another server passing with a coffee pot, "Look at that, giving garbage to garbage. Your colleague must really enjoy feeding the local vermin." A few customers chuckled uncomfortably. Others shifted in their seats, suddenly finding their meals fascinating. The elderly couple in the corner booth exchanged glances of disapproval, but remained silent. Clara heard it all as she stepped back inside, her cheeks flushed slightly, but her expression remained neutral. She simply nodded to the boy, placed a gentle hand on his bony shoulder for just a moment, and returned to her duties without acknowledging the comment. Tom Warren, the diner's manager and owner for 37 years, had been wiping glasses behind the counter. He'd seen the entire exchange, both inside and out. His eyes met Clara's briefly as she passed, a silent question in his gaze. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. No intervention needed. Tom nodded, then moved to the mocking customer's table with the coffee pot. "Refills, sir?" he asked, his voice pleasant, but noticeably cooler than the Georgia hospitality he usually extended. "Sure," the man replied, oblivious to the tension he'd created. "And tell your waitress she might want to save her charity for someone who matters. Kids like that are just leeches on society." Tom filled the cup with deliberate slowness before responding. "Everyone matters in my diner, sir," he said quietly, "and I don't tell my staff who deserves kindness and who doesn't. That's not how we operate here." The man scoffed but fell silent, suddenly aware that the other patrons were watching. Clara continued her shift as if nothing had happened, moving between tables with the same quiet efficiency, her smile neither dimmed nor forced. But those who knew her well might have noticed that she checked the parking lot more frequently that evening, her eyes searching the shadows for the slight figure who had already disappeared into the gathering darkness. "If you believe doing the right thing doesn't require permission, stay with us." Clara had first noticed the boy about 3 weeks earlier. He'd appeared like a ghost at dusk, hovering near the dumpsters behind the diner, his thin frame tense like a wild animal ready to flee at the slightest provocation. Initially she had pretended not to see him, understanding instinctively that direct acknowledgement might drive him away. Instead, she began accidentally leaving wrapped food on the back step while taking out trash. The offerings would vanish within minutes. Gradually, the boy grew bolder, moving from the shadows of the dumpsters to the wooden bench at the edge of the parking lot, never approaching the diner itself, never asking for anything, just sitting silently, watching the back door with patient, hungry eyes. Clara never questioned him or attempted conversation. She simply evolved her routine. A nod of greeting, food placed within reach, and a respectful distance maintained. The exchange became a wordless ritual that required no explanation. That night, after the mocking customer had finally paid his bill and left, Clara stayed later than usual. The incident had rattled her more than she cared to admit. As she moved through her closing duties, wiping tables, restocking condiments, counting her modest tips, she found herself wondering about the boy's story. Where did he sleep? Did he have anyone looking out for him? Should she be doing more than just providing occasional meal? Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed something on the corner table, the one closest to where she left the food packages, a folded scrap of paper secured beneath a small, smooth river stone. Clara unfolded it carefully. Written in wobbly pencil strokes were words. Thank you. Dad said if someone is kind to you, tell his friend. I will tell. She stood motionless, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. It was the first communication from the boy after weeks of silent exchanges. Something about the awkward phrasing made her throat tighten with emotion. Only then did Clara fully register something she had subconsciously noticed. The oversized jacket the boy always wore was an old military coat, with a name tape partially torn away, leaving only sun visible. She carefully tucked the note into her pocket and finished closing the diner, her mind filled with new questions. The following morning arrived with the flat, golden light of Georgia autumn. Clara wasn't scheduled to work until the evening shift, but she stopped by the diner for coffee, a habit she'd developed since moving to town 5 years earlier. Tom was at the grill, expertly flipping pancakes while managing the breakfast rush. His wife, Betty, for whom the diner was named, manned the register with cheerful efficiency, despite her 76 years. Morning, honey, Betty called over the din of clattering dishes and morning conversations. You're up earlier than usual. Clara smiled, sliding onto her usual stool at the counter. Couldn't sleep much, mine's been busy. Before Betty could inquire further, the phone behind the register rang. The older woman answered with her standard greeting. Betty's Diner, where strangers become regulars and regulars become family. Her expression shifted from cheerful to confused as she listened. Yes, she works here. No, she's actually right here now. May I ask what this is concerning? Clara watched curiously as Betty's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. I see. Yes, I understand. We'll make sure she's available. Thank you. Betty hung up the phone, looking at Clara with an expression of bewilderment. What was that about? Clara asked, taking a sip of the coffee Tom had silently placed before her. Betty leaned forward, lowering her voice despite her obvious excitement. That was someone from a federal office. Didn't catch which one. They said representatives will be coming here specifically to speak with you. Wouldn't say why, just that it's important. Me? Clara's confusion was genuine. She had no dealings with any government agency. Her life was deliberately simple. Work, home, Toby, repeat. No complications, no entanglements. Did I do something wrong? She wondered aloud, mentally reviewing her tax filings and the renewal of her food handler's permit. Tom appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. If you'd done something wrong, they wouldn't call ahead, he reasoned. Ever practical, must be something else. Throughout the morning, Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Had someone reported her for feeding the boy? Was there some regulation against giving away leftover food? Or was it something entirely unrelated? By the time she returned for her evening shift, the initial alarm had faded into a dull anxiety that hummed beneath her usual calm exterior. She worked mechanically, finding comfort in the familiar routines of the diner. Around 8:30, she glanced out the window, searching for the boy on the bench. The space remained empty. For the first time in weeks, he hadn't appeared. Clara prepared a food package anyway, placing it in its usual spot. As she stood in the cool evening air, she felt an unexpected pang of worry. Had the mockery from the previous night driven him away, or was it something worse? She returned inside to find Tom watching her from the pass-through window. No sign of him, he asked quietly. Clara shook her head. Maybe it's better if he doesn't come back. This isn't exactly a solution for whatever situation he's in. Tom considered her words. Sometimes a sandwich isn't just a sandwich. Clara, sometimes it's the only kindness a person sees all day. Clara nodded, turning back to her table. She couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed, that the boy's absence and the mysterious phone call were somehow connected. She had no idea just how right she was. Have you ever helped someone without needing a reason, only to have them repay you in an unimaginable way? Share your story. It deserves to be heard. The following day at precisely 11:43 a.m., 6 identical black SUVs with government plates pulled up outside Betty's diner. They arrived in perfect formation, dust from the rural Georgia roads coating their polished exteriors, the only indication they'd traveled some distance. Inside the diner, conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouth. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to quiet as patrons turned toward the windows, watching the unexpected procession. From the lead vehicle emerged a group of uniformed military personnel. Their movements were precise, coordinated with the efficiency that comes from years of discipline. Among them, distinguished by the 4 stars adorning his shoulders, was a tall man whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Clara, who had picked up an extra morning shift at Betty's request, stood frozen by the coffee machine. The general, for that's unmistakably what he was, removed his cap and sunglasses before entering the diner. His face was weathered but distinguished, his gray hair cropped close in traditional military style. The bell above the door chimed, seeming impossibly ordinary against the extraordinary scene unfolding. Every customer in the diner instinctively stood, responding to the authority that radiated from the officer. Even grizzled local farmers, who hadn't stood at attention in decades, found themselves straightening their postures. The general surveyed the room briefly before his eyes settled on Clara. He walked directly to the counter, removing his gloves with deliberate movements. "Are you Clara Jennings?" he asked, his voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of command. Clara nodded, finding herself temporarily unable to speak. "I'm General Grant Wallace," he said. "I'm Eli's legal guardian, the boy you've been feeding these past few weeks." The diner remained utterly silent, every year straining to catch the conversation. "Eli lost his mother last month. Cancer," the general continued. "His father, my son, was killed in action during a classified operation in Syria 2 years ago. Eli has been struggling to adjust. Sometimes he slips away from his caretaker." Clara's confusion must have shown on her face, because the general's expression softened slightly. "We've been trying to help him through his grief, but he's withdrawn from everyone, family, counselors, friends. Until he reached into his uniform jacket and withdrew an envelope, slightly crumpled from being carried. From it he extracted a child's drawing, crude figures rendered in crayon, but unmistakably depicting a woman handing food to a small boy. Below the image, in the same unsteady handwriting Clara recognized from the note, were the words, "Dad's friend who helps me." "Eli hasn't spoken more than a dozen words since his mother's funeral," General Wallace explained, emotion briefly cracking his professional demeanor. "But 3 days ago, he handed me this and asked if I could find you." The general turned the paper over. On the back was a message that made Clara's heart constrict. "Dad, there's a lady like Mom. She doesn't ask me questions. She just gives me food and doesn't make me feel ashamed." General Wallace cleared his throat, visibly composing himself before continuing. "My grandson believes you're connected to his father somehow, that you're someone his dad told to watch over him. It's not rational, but grief rarely is, especially in children." Clara found her voice at last. "I'm not, I don't know your son. I just saw a hungry child." "I know," the general nodded, "but you're the first person he's reached out to since the funeral, the first person he's trusted enough to communicate with." The diner remained silent, the usual breakfast clatter suspended as everyone absorbed the scene unfolding before them. Tom had emerged from the kitchen, standing with arms folded, his normally stoic expression softened by evident emotion. "I've spent my entire career teaching soldiers about honor and duty," General Wallace continued, his voice steady once more. "I've given speeches to thousands of troops about the values that define us as a military, and today my own grandson has taught me something profound, that honor sometimes resides in leftover sandwiches," and a gentle touch on the shoulder. Clara blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Is he okay?" "Eli, I mean, I didn't see him yesterday." "He's outside," the general replied, gesturing toward one of the SUVs. "Would you be willing to speak with him, properly this time?" Before Clara could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Every head turned to see the small figure standing in the entrance. Eli, now clean and properly dressed, though his expression remained solemn and his body language hesitant. General Wallace extended his hand toward the boy. "It's all right, son, this is the lady from your drawing." Eli approached slowly, stopping a few feet from Clara. He said nothing, but his eyes, intelligent and carrying a weight no child should bear, studied her intently. Clara knelt to his level, instinctively knowing that height might be intimidating. "Hello, Eli, I'm Clara." The boy remained silent, but reached into his pocket and withdrew the small riverstone that had held down his note. He extended it toward her, an offering. Clara accepted it with the gravity such gifts deserve. "Thank you, I'll keep it safe." A barely perceptible nod was his only response, but it felt like a monumental breakthrough to everyone watching. "My team brought something for you, Miss Jennings," General Wallace said as Clara rose to her feet again. He motioned to one of his aides, who stepped forward with an official-looking document in a leather portfolio. "This is a letter of commendation from the Department of Defense, acknowledging your compassion toward the family member of a fallen hero. Such recognition is rare for civilians, but in this case, entirely warranted." A murmur rippled through the diner. The same customers who had witnessed her mockery just days earlier now watched with newfound respect, as Clara accepted the portfolio with trembling hands. "I didn't do anything special," she protested softly. "Anyone would have done the same." The general's expression was gentle but firm. "No, Miss Jennings, not everyone would have. That's precisely the point." As if on cue, the man who had mocked Clara 2 nights earlier entered the diner. He stopped abruptly, absorbing the scene. Military personnel, a 4-star general, and the waitress he had ridiculed now the center of solemn attention. General Wallace turned slightly, his experienced eyes immediately assessing the newcomer's discomfort. "Is there a problem?" "No," the man replied, backing toward the door. "No problem at all." "Good," the general nodded, "because I believe this establishment has a policy that everyone matters here, a philosophy I find worthy of the highest respect." The man slipped out, the bell announcing his retreat as definitively as it had heralded the general's arrival. The contrast was not lost on the regular patrons. several of whom exchanged knowing glances. One of the general's aides approached, speaking quietly into his ear. Wallace nodded before turning back to Clara. Miss Jennings, we've taken the liberty of establishing a trust fund for Eli's education. As part of that arrangement, we'd like to contribute to this establishment as well, specifically to provide meals for those who might otherwise go without. Tom stepped forward at this, finding his voice. That's very generous, General, but it's not charity, Wallace interrupted smoothly. It's a strategic investment in community resilience. The military understands that strength begins with basic needs being met. His eyes moved from Tom to Clara, and with people who recognize those needs without being asked. Another aide approached, carrying a polished wooden box. The general opened it to reveal a medallion on a blue ribbon. This is the Civilian Service Medal of the Department of Defense, he explained. It recognizes civilians whose actions embody the core values our military strives to uphold, values like compassion, selflessness, and moral courage. Clara stared at the medal, unable to comprehend how her simple act of kindness had escalated to this moment. The diner had fallen completely silent again. My son, Eli's father, believed that true warriors were defined not by their actions in battle, but by how they treated the vulnerable during times of peace. Wallace continued, his voice gaining a personal quality it had previously lacked. He would have recognized what you did immediately, Miss Jennings. He would have seen it as the highest form of service. With careful movements, the general placed the medal in Clara's palm, closing her fingers around it. Not all heroes wear uniforms, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent diner. Some wear aprons. Out of the corner of her eye, Clara saw Betty dabbing at tears with a napkin. Tom stood straighter than she'd ever seen him, pride evident in his usually stoic expression. Eli, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly moved closer to Clara. Without warning, he wrapped his thin arms around her waist, a child seeking comfort from the one adult who had expected nothing in return. After a moment's surprise, Clara returned the embrace, one hand gently resting on the back of his head. No one spoke. No one needed to. Sometimes Clara realized, the most profound connections form in silence, just as the most meaningful acts of kindness often pass without witness or acclaim, until they don't. Have you ever made a small gesture that became someone else's lifelong story? Tell us about it. From that day forward, Betty's diner was never quite the same. The humble establishment, that had served the community for decades without fanfare, suddenly found itself with a special item on the menu, Eli's sandwich, turkey and cheese on whole wheat, with extra pickles, just the way Clara had prepared it for the boy. General Wallace declined all media interviews despite numerous requests. When pressed by a persistent local reporter who caught him leaving a follow-up visit, he offered only one statement: I came to thank a soldier who doesn't wear a uniform. The word spread throughout the military community, resonating with service members who understood that courage and honor weren't confined to battlefields. Eli eventually went to live with his uncle, his father's brother, who had recently retired from the army. The arrangement provided stability while maintaining his connection to his father's military legacy. The uncle's home was close enough that Eli could visit the diner on weekends, where he would sit at his usual spot, no longer outside on the bench, but at a small table near the window, reserved with a discreet placard bearing his name. Gradually the boy began to hear. Words came hesitantly at first, a whispered thank you for a refill of chocolate milk, a quiet question about Toby the cat. By Christmas he was sharing short stories about his father with Clara. During the quieter moments of her Dad could eat 3 Eli sandwiches, he confided one afternoon, a glimmer of pride breaking through his solemnity, and he always left the crusts. Clara continued working at Betty's, declining offers for interviews, book deals, and even a position at the general's private household. Her life remained deliberately simple, though now enriched by her friendship with Eli, and the extended military family that had embraced her. Never wanted fame, she explained to Tom when he questioned her decision to turn down a particularly lucrative offer. Just wanted to help a hungry kid. Tom nodded, understanding completely. He had, however, made one significant change to the diner. Beside the wall of military photographs, a feature of many establishments near bases, hung a new frame containing Clara's letter of commendation and a simple quotation. People often recognize honor in uniforms, but sometimes it wears a faded apron and offers a meal no one sees. 6 months after the general's visit, something unexpected happened. The trust fund he had established began receiving anonymous donations from military personnel around the world. What had started as support for one grieving boy expanded into something larger, a foundation dedicated to supporting children of fallen service members. They named it the Bench Initiative, a reference to both Eli's waiting spot and the idea of providing a place of rest for those carrying heavy burdens. Clara was asked to serve on its advisory board, providing insight into how small acts of kindness could open doors that formal assistance often could. At the foundation's first official meeting, held in a conference room at the local library, Clara found herself surrounded by military officers, child psychologists, and social workers.
all looking to her for guidance. I don't have any special training, she admitted, feeling out of place. I just saw a child who needed help, and didn't make a big deal about giving it. That's exactly why you're here, responded a silver-haired colonel who had flown in from Washington. You saw need without requiring paperwork. You offered dignity alongside nourishment. These are qualities our programs often lack. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Clara received a package from Eli, now living with his uncle, but thriving in ways that had once seemed impossible. Inside was a carefully crafted model of Betty's diner, complete with a tiny bench at the edge of the parking lot. The detail was remarkable for a child his age, suggesting hours of painstaking work. A note accompanied it. This is where I found my voice again. Thank you for waiting until I was ready to use it. The man who had mocked Clara returned to the diner exactly once, to deliver a handwritten apology and pay for a month of Eli's sandwiches to be given free to any child who needed one. Clara accepted both with characteristic grace, neither dwelling on past offense nor seeking vindication. We all have bad days, she told him simply. What matters is what we learn from them. As word of the Bench initiative spread, similar programs began appearing in military communities across the country. Small acts of kindness, inspired by one waitress and one hungry child, multiplied in ways no formal policy could have achieved. Eli's drawing found a permanent home behind the counter, protected by a simple frame. New customers often asked about it, providing Clara the opportunity to share not her own role in the story but the message she believed mattered most. Sometimes people just need kindness without question, she would explain while refilling coffee cups. Food without judgment, help without having to explain why they need it. On quiet evenings, when the dinner rush subsided and the regulars settled into comfortable conversations, Clara would sometimes glance at Eli's empty bench outside. She kept a sandwich ready just in case another silent, hungry figure might appear from the shadows. Because Clara Jennings had learned something profound in her unexpected journey from anonymous waitress to reluctant hero. That evening, as Clara closed the register and turned off the neon sign at Betty's Grill, the silence around her felt sacred, not because of medals or commendations, but because a boy had spoken again, because grief had been softened by grace, and because she had offered love with nothing more than a sandwich and a silent presence. That was how hope was born, not in headlines but in unseen moments that changed everything. Kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial act, reaching shores the giver may never see, and sometimes those ripples return as waves that transform everything they touch. Have you ever performed an act of kindness without anyone watching, and then one day it came back to you in a way that brought tears to your eyes? Comment about a small action you've witnessed. It may have been the flame for someone lost in darkness. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where good deeds are always remembered and someone always stands up for you.